Welcome to Peak TV. I'm Nick Dagan, Executive Director of Peak Asset Management, and we've got Fred Sancilio from Lobe Sciences all the way in sunny Florida. Well, it's not sunny at the moment, Fred, but nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite here.
Fred, I've been a shareholder for a long time now, and you took the reins only a few years ago. Since then, the stock is up over 500%. The business is in a really strong backing. What do you feel has been the big re-rate for the company?
Well, I think the main issue with Lobe when I joined the company, and I only joined about just over a year ago, was, we had a fairly messy balance sheet, as I think that's pretty well understood, but it also didn't have very firm direction. It wasn't focused on where it wanted to go. And I think when I became the major shareholder of the company, my mindset is that of an owner. It's not the mindset of just an operator. And so the first thing I did was bring in people that I was very aware of, people who worked with me for years in the past. We restructured the board. We put a plan together to restructure the balance sheet. So we got rid of the debt as much as we could. We replaced people who we felt weren't doing the job we wanted them to do. And then we focused on a plan, and we all stayed focused on the same plan so that we move the program forward. So yeah, it's very, very different when you're an owner as opposed to when you're just an operator. We have skin in the game, and that's ever so important.
And Fred, you've got very different indications in your pipeline. Can you just elaborate a little bit more for those listening, what problem you're solving?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you wouldn't think that a disease called chronic cluster headache and sickle cell disease are related to one another, and the development programs would be very similar, but they're virtually identical. If you look at the symptoms of a person with sickle cell disease and you look at symptoms of a person with chronic cluster headache, they're identical. All right. You ask the person what they feel, they're in severe pain. It's chronic pain. It's inflammatory pain. And they happen to be very, very similar as far as the endpoints in a clinical trial. Now, that's by happenstance, not by plan. For these particular two indications, they're very, very similar. Now, irrelevant to that is the development process. All right. I've been doing this for a long, long time, 40 plus years. It doesn't matter what drug you're developing. When you're developing it from scratch all the way through to the first indication, which is a long ways in and a long de-risking cycle in, you're doing exactly the same thing. The preclinical work, the clinical work, the CMC work, the work associated with formulation, development, stability, the analytical work, identical. So I could take a product from discovery all the way through to a very de-risked, high-value program and not really care about what the indication is. Once I get to the indication, you hire the proper KOLs. KOLs means key opinion leaders. All right. If you're looking at cluster headache, you hire doctors who treat cluster headaches. If you're looking at sickle cell disease, you hire hematologists that treat those. All right. And they design the endpoint. And as it turns out, for these two indications, it's the same endpoint, pain.
Obviously, huge addressable markets. Fred, I just want to talk about the capital structure, and the balance sheet's quite interesting because you've got around $2 million of working capital, but then you've got a subsidiary, Cynaptec, that just raised $8 million. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because just how that flows through?
Yeah, I remind people listening here, these are Canadian dollars and not American dollars. They're substantially less American dollars. But the way we've designed the company is a bit different than what most companies have. And I'm used to doing this. I've done this 3 or 4 times in my past. All right. You have a central group of people that basically is overhead. That's the finance group, the business development groups, and all of these other groups that have shared services. Those groups are shared among different programs. So they bill fractions of their times to subsidiaries that own the intellectual property. And so the intellectual property associated with cluster headaches is owned by a company that we created called Cynaptec. That Cynaptec is a private company, and it owns the IP associated with just one indication. All right. And that's psilocin, which is L130, applied to cluster headaches. On the other hand, you have another company called Applied Lipids, which is focused on sickle cell disease and fatty acid. And that company stays focused on their particular group. Now, when you have an investor come in, you could have an investor that's interested in the entire program, Lobe, right? And they're public company type investors, high net worth individuals, family offices, and the regular institutional investors, and they can invest into a public company. But there are a lot of biotech investors that don't want to invest in public companies. They want to invest in private enterprises, private companies. All right. In this particular case, we had a group that had invested with me many years ago, and they came in immediately with the first major investment, which carries us all the way through to phase two. Right. And so what we do is we create the subsidiary, we move the technology into the subsidiary, we de-risk it with our own money. We are the seed investors. So we take it to a lower point of risk. We increase the value, add IP, and then go find investors, either at the sub level or, at the low level. I would prefer at the sub level so we don't dilute shareholders. We want to
Yeah.
maintain as little dilution as possible. I save my dilution to give to people who are doing the work. And so they are shareholders. So virtually everybody that works with me is a shareholder, a big shareholder.
No, I think that's an important point, Fred, just having a lot of skin in the game. And obviously, you're a major shareholder, we're major shareholders. And I know we've had numerous discussions over the last few years just about the subsidiary and who owns the IP, but also just no dilution on the top co, which I think is important. Um, for those listening as well, I mean, Fred, you've got over 40 plus years experience, business experience in terms of building businesses, exits. I mean, where do you see Lobe, where this fits in? Because you've probably invested, I'd say, multi-million dollars yourself and having skin in the game. Where is the exit strategy for you and shareholders probably in the next 12, 18, 24 months?
Realistically, we should stay focused and on track to moving these assets to lower and lower areas of risk, right? Continue to de-risk the assets. At some point, the maximum value of each of these programs, and Lobe, with its current overhead, can handle 3 subsidiaries. So we only have 2 right now, but it can handle 3. I know that from past experience doing this 4 or 5 other times. We could handle 3 programs like this at the same time. Each one of these programs will mature between phase 2 and the implementation of phase 3. So once we complete phase 2, either proof of concept or a phase 2 study, they'll be ready for looking for a licensing partner. That licensing partner will then pay for everything else through the end. And we should start seeing some very interesting revenues at that point. My experience is typically once you reach phase 2 and you're in that proof of concept stage, it takes about 9 months to close a deal. And you usually have 3, 4 people approach you. You don't have to work real hard once they know you've de-risked the program.
And have you had many approaches overall? Obviously, you're a public company, so you can't say, but how's the interest levels internally going through and your confidence levels to get this into a license down the track?
Yeah. I can't talk about low, but what I can talk about is my prior experience. And I've had a very high success rate in licensing products that have gone past phase 1 and are into phase 2. And I believe these are no different than all the other products that we've done. We've had some very, very big successes in the past. Very few of them don't find a home.
And Fred, as a closing remark, obviously, as I said, I mean, we're very happy. Investors came in at 5 cents a few years ago. Stock's trading, I think, at about 14 cents Canadian. Have you got any thoughts to list the company on the NASDAQ or to attract US investors? I know we spoke about the ASX, but obviously the NASDAQ's a much bigger market. And what are some of the catalysts investors can expect over the next few months?
Yeah, those are 2 very separate questions. I think I've made it pretty well known. And if you look through our filings, we are focused on going to a senior exchange
Mhm.
in the relatively near future.
And just in terms of final words, in terms of catalysts, why should investors be buying the stock right now?
Yeah, it's a good time. I think you've seen that as far as the growth of the last few months is concerned. If you go to our website, you look at our pipeline and you look at the milestones, we are on track and on budget. And that is our Bible. We live by that publication that we have out there. That is what we're going to do. And if it's going to change, we'll let people know it loud and clear. But right now, the pipeline that we put together, the pipeline slide, the plan hasn't changed, and it's going to continue down that path until somebody either acquires the particular asset or we find that one of the indications is not what we expect it to be. But I don't think that's the case. There's one other thing, Liv, and you and I haven't talked about this, but once that IND is filed and accepted by FDA to continue on the program, psilocin itself becomes available to any company that's currently developing psilocybin. Okay. Remember, psilocybin is a prodrug that's only 50% bioavailable, which means that you could cut the dose, all right, with 100% available psilocin and get the same dose every time you take the tablet. So the beauty of psilocin is we don't have to be enzymatically converted to the metabolite. It is the metabolite. It's highly stable, and it could take the place of any drug that's out there right now that's using psilocin, psilocybin as a starting material. So I believe the raw material itself as an API is going to be licensed to companies in addition to the products that come out of it.
Fred, fantastic. Thanks very much for joining us at Peak TV, and all the very best in the future endeavors. And as you know, we're really strong supporters. So nice to see you, and thanks very much.
And, and I just wanted to thank you for your support. You've been right there for us as we needed you. And thank you, Niv.